Hi, and welcome to today's recorded webinar, where we're going to be covering disrepairs in the housing sector. I'm Stoffer. I'm one of the consultants at Adesi, and formerly of the housing sector. Now I help to improve the housing sector, so highly appropriate for me to be running today's webinar. We thought we'd run today's session because we recently completed a disrepairs process review for a housing association, and we thought it'd be useful to bring this up as a topic for the CI practitioners because it's an area that's increasing in importance and prominence within the area, and is becoming increasingly problematic for social landlords to manage. So it's now more critical than ever that social landlords are on top of their disrepairs processes. And we thought we would share some of our key recommendations for designing an effective and well-managed disrepairs process. But just to first start off with some context around what we mean by disrepairs. So landlords have an obligation to maintain their properties to a safe and suitable condition. And where this isn't done, for example, a responsive repair isn't fully completed and left unattended for a long period of time, then tenants have a right to submit a formal disrepair claim against their landlord. And where this is found to be legitimate and there is an actual repair that's been outstanding, then this is going to result in a potentially significant compensation payment to the tenant alongside the completion of the outstanding works. And that compensation usually is a function of the severity of the repairs issue, plus the duration that it was left outstanding for, and can in some cases be in the tens of thousands of pounds for one individual claim. So when you start to scale this up, this can be a significant amount of compensation that we're talking about for social landlords. Now, disrepairs cases have been around for a while. They aren't anything new, but in recent years, we've started to see a very sharp increase in the number of disrepairs cases across the whole housing sector. And if we look at, for example, local authorities, they actually reported an average 132% increase in cases since 2017, which is a significant jump. It's actually higher in London, where it seems to be even more extreme. I think one of the worst case scenarios for a local authority is they experience a 600% increase in the numbers of cases over a 4-year period, which for any team experiencing that amount of increase to their demand would be experiencing significant difficulties in the delivery of their service and experiencing lots and lots of pain. Not only are cases increasing, but alongside that, the legal costs for social landlords are also increasing. So many have experienced a doubling or tripling of legal costs, which can reach into the millions of pounds for some of the larger social landlords, which means it's not getting too far away from the territory of what their total arrears balance could be for the organisation. And we know how much resource gets put into maintaining and monitoring that function within social landlords. So this is starting to enter into similar territory of financial risk. So it's really important that this area is managed well and kept on top of appropriately for social landlords. And just to explain briefly why we're seeing this increase in cases, there's a few reasons. One is tenants have more rights now to hold their landlords to account for these types of problems. But the main driver appears to be claims farmer type law firms seeing disrepairs as a opportunity to make easy money. So we're starting to see quite an aggressive targeting of disrepairs cases by law firms who see disrepairs as an area to be able to make a high profit and also a very high likelihood of success for winning lots of these cases too. These are no-win, no-fee cases. So they aren't being targeted without merit at all. Although volumes of cases have increased, there aren't actually a high proportion of spurious claims. A lot of these are legitimate claims that are being submitted. So law firms have realised this is an area to target, and the sorts of things that they're doing is they're actively approaching tenants to see if they have unresolved repairs. One thing if you can do is if you search for a housing association on Google, and with disrepairs, the first couple of entries usually will be law firms who have put themselves to the top of the list to try to reach out to tenants from those social landlords before you even see the social landlord's website underneath. Also, lots of leafleting and flyering of tenants as well, which is leading to lots of new claims being submitted that otherwise may not have been raised. So that seems to be the main driving force. But then alongside that, there's been increased media coverage of poor living conditions, often following individual tenants who've had problems for years that have never been resolved, that have got worse and worse and worse, which has put disrepairs issues under far greater spotlight than ever before. And people realize, okay, well, I can do something about this. I have recourse to be able to sort these problems out that I've been suffering from for potentially a long time. So you've essentially got this perfect storm of where you have poor repairs performance within a social landlord, with the increased media scrutiny meeting this cash cow for law firms who are jumping on this problem that the sector is experiencing. And that is what is driving that perfect recipe for a high volume of new disrepairs cases coming through. And it doesn't seem like that is going to be changing anytime soon, until social landlords can get on top of their repairs issues ultimately. So that's the context. And before we even get into the disrepairs process itself, the number one priority really for social landlords is stopping disrepairs from developing in the first place. So generally speaking, most disrepairs cases are the result of a service failure in the responsive repairs process. So it was reported, people have come out maybe to try to fix it, but then it was never fully resolved and it's maybe got worse over time. So that these are avoidable cases which are resulting in disrepair. So the main focus, the main priority really should be on fixing poorly performing responsive repairs process. That will help to stem the flow of the volume of disrepair claims and cases that we're starting to see come through. And the main approach that social landlords should use for that responsive repairs process is adopting a right first time repairs philosophy, where the main objective is going to the property, making sure we're getting it fixed there and then, even if it means going away and getting more materials, etc., but prioritizing that over internal targets for numbers of appointments completed per day. That's going to help people get to a place where the process is performing in the proper way. So that is the root cause of the problem. If we sort out the root cause of the problem, you'll prevent an issue from developing into disrepair in the first place. So that's more the longer term aim. However, you'll still have disrepair cases coming through. So it's still going to be important to make sure that you have an effective disrepairs process in place. So just to talk you through what the high level stages of a disrepairs process looks like, which should be pretty much the same for most social landlords. It all starts off with a disrepair claim being submitted, usually through the tenant solicitor, who they've spoken to, and to find out how to submit that claim. The first thing that the social landlord needs to complete is to do a thorough survey of the property, to investigate the disrepair claim itself, but also to look at the entire property to find out what are all the repairs issues that could be there that may not have even been reported in the claim itself. Off the back of that comes a comprehensive report which outlines which proposed works the social landlord thinks need to take place, along with the associated costs for completing those works. Then we enter a stage of legal negotiation with the tenant solicitor to ultimately agree what works are going to be completed. There can be a lot of back and forth where they may try to get more works completed than we might have suggested initially. So yeah, that can become a bit of a problematic part of the process, and it can become a little bit stuck, but ultimately we will reach an agreement. And once that's done, we can start to get to the works complete stage. So scoping the works potentially, but completing all the works that were agreed from the previous stage and quality checking making sure everything's been done to the required standard. And then it all comes to a close after that point with the settling of legal costs and the payment of the compensation to the tenant. And that final stage there is another potentially very lengthy stage of the process and can go on for a long period of time, months in many cases. And at the moment, this whole process for many social landlords, because of the sheer volume of cases, individual cases, their duration is often being extended. So this could take place, best case scenario for many landlords over the period of a few months. Worst case scenario, this could be years to complete for a social landlord. So it can become really drawn out and really painful. The longer it goes on, the higher the legal costs are likely to be to settle the case as well. So it's critical that the process is kept as short as possible. So they're the main stages to be aware of. And we've got 4 characteristics of what makes a good disrepairs process and that we want to bring to your attention. The first one is not batching survey appointments for surveyors. So the problem of batching survey appointments, which is booking a surveyor's calendar up for maybe 2 or 3 days to complete 5 survey appointments, is you've decoupled the survey appointment from the subsequent completion of the report. So if you give a surveyor 5 surveys to complete in 1 week, and then they've got another 5 surveys to complete the following week, you can't have any guarantees that they're going to be able to complete all the associated reports in time before the next surveys are coming on board. And what that means is you're actually risking a backlog of outstanding reports starting to build up, which could be a few reports per week, which over the period of a few months, you could end up having quite a significant number of reports that are waiting to be written up. What we have seen is that I think worst case scenario is a survey was completed, and it wasn't until 4 weeks later that the corresponding report was completed. And the bigger the gap you have between the survey and the report, the lower the quality that report is going to be. They're less likely to remember the detail of what they assessed during the inspection itself. They may struggle to remember which room or which part of the property that particular repair related to. They've seen so many other properties since. So that report may not be to the required standard, which means that in the negotiation phase for agreeing works, we could come unstuck as they spot issues and problems, and we have to go back to the drawing board potentially. So we should never really be decoupling surveys from the report. So the aim should be completing the report immediately after the survey that's just been completed and before moving on to the next appointment. That way you're going to guarantee you get all the right information in as soon as possible, and that case can continue to flow through the process rather than being held up at that sort of next stage unnecessarily. So really here we're talking about prioritizing that single piece flow to prevent those backlogs from starting to build up. I think there can be a tendency for teams to become focusing a bit too much on the survey side. We think if we just get 5 surveys completed each week, we should be okay. But that means that they've disregarded the second part of that same exercise, which is the report. It should be seen as it should be seen as part of the exact same exercise, doing that report afterwards. So we need to make sure that teams steer away from that batching approach. Another thing to consider for disrepairs process is looking to minimise the number of visits that we have to the property itself. So the main aim should be to gather all the required information for the property in a single go. And that might mean combining the initial survey appointment with the scope of works appointment as part of the same exercise. Where those are separated out and we've got 2 different appointments, that's starting to really extend the total process time. And particularly if we have a backlog and it's difficult to have near-term availability to complete some of these appointments, it could extend total process time by weeks, if not months, by splitting out those two aspects of the process. So where possible, getting it all done at the start as early as you can, getting all the information you need. It might mean a slightly longer initial appointment, but that's still a better use of resource in the long run. It also may require a joint inspection from the surveyor plus the contractor who's going to be completing the works, and that might be a change to how teams complete the process at the moment and require a bit of adjustment, but it's absolutely achievable. The other benefit of just having single visits is it's reducing the risk of having a no access as well. It's halved the risk of having a no access, which is also important in being able to move the process along seamlessly. Yeah, very much we think this is what teams should be aiming for, just having that single appointment to get all the required information. Thirdly, there's a big opportunity within the disrepairs process to complete parts of the process, excuse me, in parallel. So namely completing the legal process alongside the works process. So usually you'll have a legal caseworker, an internal legal caseworker, who is the main liaison with the tenant solicitor, and they have their steps to complete. And they should begin their quite complicated cost negotiation work at the earliest available opportunity, usually upon the receipt of the survey report from the surveyor, and not waiting until after the works are completed. If they're waiting until after the works are completed, then you're potentially extending the whole process by months, because this legal process to agree the damages and the costs is often the most lengthy part of the whole process. It can take half a year, if not longer, to completely do that part. So it needs to be started as early as it possibly can. Best case scenario is you've completed the works and the legal process has almost finished, and you don't really want to have too much of an overlap at either end. So it can be achieved. It just needs to be crystal clear that legal caseworkers are working in a consistent way and picking this up at the very beginning, as soon as they have the information that's available to them. And then lastly, this is more a point around reporting. So it's very important to be able to distinguish open cases based on whether the works have been completed or are still pending, still waiting to be completed. The reason being, once works are done, the case is still open, as I've mentioned, for maybe quite a few months while the legal process is still being finished off. But the most important thing in this case is the works having been done. That means the issue has been resolved. The legal process needs to be completed, of course, but it will be taken care of. It's always going to be a complicated, tricky process with the tenant solicitor, but that's not really the main area of concern. So when you're doing reporting, it's really important to not just look at open cases, particularly if management are looking at the performance of the team and they see, hang on a second, we've got hundreds of open cases. Have we not been delivering our process effectively here? You know, are we not completing the works for these disrepairs cases yet? Actually, if you interrogate it further, it's quite likely maybe half of those open cases the works have maybe didn't be done for already. So you really need to be able to sort of distinguish between the different types of close. So open cases with works completed and open cases with works outstanding, because otherwise you can negatively skew the performance of a disrepairs team who've done their part of the process and there's nothing more for them to be able to do. So important to be able to make that distinction between those 2 points there. So those are 4 of some of our suggestions. There's also other suggestions for improvements as well, but they were the 4 ones that we wanted to focus on specifically as a starter for 10 that teams can consider for their disrepairs process. Now, in addition to that, you can improve your disrepairs process and you can make it far better to what it is at the moment, and that might help you work through some of those high levels of demand that are coming through. It might help you to reduce your total process time. But in light of the exceptionally high levels of demand that we're seeing at the moment, it may not be sufficient to deal with it alone. So in addition to improving the process, it may also be necessary to complete a capacity assessment for the team to establish and look into what resource the disrepairs team requires to meet the existing levels of demand with the new process, because with the new process we've already taken out waste from the process, and they won't need as much resource as they would from their current process potentially, but they may still need additional resource. It's not uncommon for some disrepair teams to consider temporary resource, especially because the demand is so variable. Suddenly you can see explosions of disrepair cases coming through. So being able to react quickly and resource yourself effectively, bringing in temporary resource, and then when cases go down again, being able to re-resource effectively becomes a really important approach for dealing with disrepairs. So it's going to be, I think, a combination of keeping a close eye on that sort of appropriate capacity alongside making the process as effective as possible. I think both will be required to keep on top of disrepairs for the next few years. Okay, so that's everything we wanted to cover with disrepairs. It'll be good for you to let us know if there's any further questions you have that relate to disrepairs, and we'd be more than happy to answer any of those for you. But for now, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing some of you all very shortly.